The Zephyrian Collective had built their reputation on two things: impeccable taste in crystalline architecture and an almost supernatural ability to look down their elongated snouts at lesser civilizations. Today marked their annual Primitive Species Review, a delightfully condescending exercise where they catalogued which backwater planets had managed to discover fire this year. Commander Vexthara adjusted her ceremonial viewing apparatus, a device that cost more than most planetary defense budgets and served the singular purpose of making her feel superior while observing inferior species. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the unfashionable arm of the galaxy. "Ah yes, the humans," she muttered, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for discussing moldy cheese or outdated furniture. "Let's see what these charming primitives have managed to accomplish." The data streams began flowing across her consciousness through neural interface, each piece of information more amusing than the last. The humans still relied on chemical combustion for propulsion. They fired solid metal projectiles at each other. Most entertainingly, they seemed to think that splitting atoms was somehow impressive. "Crix," she called to her chief analyst, a being whose sole purpose in life was to find increasingly creative ways to mock technological development. "Tell me you're seeing this." Crix materialized beside her, his form shimmering with the barely contained energy of someone who lived to be professionally unimpressed. "Oh, Commander, it's even better than the preliminary reports suggested. They're still using something called gunpowder. Apparently they mix various chemicals together and light them on fire." "Wonderful." Vexthara's laugh resonated through the observation chamber. "How wonderfully quaint. What's next? Are they going to try rubbing sticks together?" The technical readouts continued their parade of human inadequacy. Their fastest spacecraft crawled along at a pathetic fraction of light speed. Their weapons systems relied on crude kinetic energy. Most hilariously, they seemed to think that manipulating electromagnetic fields was somehow sophisticated. Zolmek, the secondary analyst whose job was to find things that Crix missed, floated over with additional data. "Commander, their military organization is particularly amusing. They have something called tanks that move on circular metal tracks. They shoot metal cylinders at each other while making loud noises." "Tracks?" Vexthara wiped away what might have been a tear of laughter. "Like those ancient mining vehicles our ancestors used before they discovered proper levitation technology? Oh, this is precious." The official assessment practically wrote itself. Pre-quantum civilization. Developmental stage, embarrassingly early. Threat level, negligible. Recommendation? Charitable observation, with possible educational intervention. Inject the survival, possible educational Very well, Vexthara decided, settling back into her command throne. "Let's dispatch an ambassador. Someone should really help these poor creatures understand how the galaxy actually works." Ambassador Kethlorn received his assignment with the weary resignation of someone who'd spent centuries explaining basic physics to species that thought faster than light travel was somehow impressive. His ship, the Condescending Regard, dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's moon with all the subtlety of a supernova. He'd brought what he considered appropriate technology for primitive species contact. Basic energy weapons that wouldn't overwhelm their simple minds, hover platforms that demonstrated, but didn't flaunt, superior engineering, and communication devices that could translate their quaint linguistic attempts. The humans, bless their simple hearts, had established contact protocols that involved something called radio waves. Radio waves. Kethlorn couldn't remember the last time he'd encountered a species that still used electromagnetic radiation for anything other than heating food. "Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet," he broadcast in their dominant language, taking care to speak slowly and clearly. "We are the Zephyrian Collective. We have come to offer guidance and friendship to your developing civilization." The response came from someone identifying himself as Maverick Chen, apparently some sort of human engineer. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador. We're honored by your visit. Would you care to land at our facility in Nevada? We'd love to show you around." How polite. How charmingly naive. Kethorn began his descent, already composing the report he'd send back about these endearing primitives. The landing facility was exactly what he'd expected. Crude concrete structures, primitive metal constructions, and the omnipresent smell of chemical combustion. Human personnel moved about in what they probably considered organized fashion, though by Zephyrian standards, it looked more like controlled chaos. Maverick Chen turned out to be a pleasant enough creature, despite his obvious technological limitations. He wore simple fabric clothing and carried what appeared to be a communication device that required manual manipulation. "Ambassador," Chen said with what seemed like genuine warmth, "we're truly excited to meet our first interstellar visitors. We've prepared a small demonstration of our capabilities, if you're interested." Kethlorn's hearts, he had 3, which he considered appropriately superior, filled with something approaching fondness. "Of course, my friend. We're always interested in seeing how developing civilizations approach the challenges of existence." The demonstration began with what the humans called their standard military equipment. Kethlorn watched with benevolent amusement as they wheeled out various devices that looked like museum pieces from his civilization's distant past. "This is our main battle tank," Chen explained, gesturing to a massive metal construction that moved on those adorable tracks. "It fires a 120mm depleted uranium round at approximately 1,670 meters per second. Kethlorn nodded politely. "Fascinating. And you achieved this through chemical expansion?" "That's right. We use a controlled explosion to propel the projectile." The ambassador's expression grew even more indulgent. "How wonderfully direct. We have some energy weapons aboard our ship that might interest you. They use concentrated plasma to achieve similar effects." "Plasma weapons," Chen repeated, as if the concept were somehow novel. "How interesting. We'd love to see them." The demonstration continued with increasingly primitive displays, aircraft that required air to generate lift, missiles that used chemical propulsion, soldiers carrying weapons that fired individual metal projectiles. "Tell me," Kethlorn said during a brief pause, "have you experimented with gravitational manipulation? Perhaps basic matter-energy conversion?" "Oh, we've done some work in those areas," Chen replied with what seemed like modesty. "Nothing too sophisticated, of course." The ambassador felt a warm glow of superiority. These humans were so refreshingly honest about their limitations. General Patricia Wells arrived to oversee the weapons testing, a stern-faced woman who carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She greeted Kethlorn with professional courtesy and a handshake that was surprisingly firm. "Ambassador," she said, "we're going to demonstrate our kinetic projectile systems. I hope you'll find them educational." "I'm certain I will, General. Your species' ingenuity within your technological constraints is truly admirable." The testing range stretched across several kilometers of desert landscape. Human personnel had arranged various targets at different distances, some protected by what appeared to be energy shields that Kethlorn recognized as reasonably competent defensive technology. "We'll start with our basic infantry weapons," Wells announced, standard-issue rifles firing 5.56mm rounds. The demonstration began with a sound that made Kethlorn's auditory organs tingle unpleasantly. The humans' rifles produced sharp cracking noises that echoed across the landscape. The projectiles struck their targets with satisfying impacts, but nothing that seemed particularly impressive. "Charming," he murmured to Chen. "The acoustic component adds a certain rustic authenticity." Chen smiled in that peculiar human way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're rather fond of the traditional approaches." The testing progressed to larger weapons, artillery pieces that fired explosive shells, tanks that launched their depleted uranium rounds with tremendous noise and smoke. Each demonstration prompted polite appreciation from Kethlorn, who made mental notes about the various ways these primitive weapons could be improved with proper technology. "Now," General Wells announced, "we'd like to demonstrate our more advanced systems." She gestured toward a device that looked remarkably similar to the previous weapons, despite being labeled as advanced. It appeared to be another kinetic projectile system, perhaps with marginally better targeting capabilities. "This is our XM-2045 kinetic acceleration platform," Wells explained. "It fires a modified tungsten projectile at approximately 3,000 meters per second." Kethlorn nodded approvingly. "Impressive improvement over your earlier designs. Though I should mention that our basic plasma rifles achieve similar destructive effects with considerably less noise." "I'm sure they do," Wells replied. "Would you mind if we tested one of our rounds against your ship's defensive systems, just to see how our primitive technology measures up?" The ambassador's expression grew even more indulgent. "Certainly, though I should warn you that Zephyrian defensive fields are rather more sophisticated than what you're accustomed to encountering." He activated his ship's shields, which shimmered to life around the sleek vessel. The energy barrier was designed to deflect plasma bolts, absorb kinetic impacts, and generally make lesser civilizations feel appropriately inadequate. General Wells made some adjustments to her weapon system, consulting with technicians who spoke in hushed tones about gravitational lensing and quantum state manipulation. Kethlorn assumed they were discussing primitive targeting improvements. "Firing," Wells announced. The weapon discharged with a sound unlike anything Kethlorn had heard before. Not the crude chemical explosion he'd expected, but something that seemed to bend reality itself around the projectile. The round struck his ship's shields, and the shields failed. Not gradually, not with the satisfying pyrotechnics of a proper energy weapon duel, but instantly and completely. The projectile continued through the hull of his ship, leaving a perfectly circular hole that seemed to defy several laws of physics. "Interesting," Chen observed mildly. "The containment field held better than we expected." Kethlorn stared at his ship, his three hearts performing complex arrhythmic patterns. "Containment field?" "For the micro-singularity," Wells explained, as if discussing the weather. "We've found that conventional rounds don't always perform optimally against advanced shielding, so we developed these little beauties. Each projectile contains a controlled gravitational anomaly that collapses precisely 0.3 seconds after impact." "Micro-singularity?" Kethlorn's voice climbed several octaves. "You're firing miniature black holes?" "Well, yes," Chan said. "It seemed like the most straightforward solution to the defensive technology problem, though I should mention that our earlier demonstration wasn't quite comprehensive." Dr. Elena Vasquez approached the group, carrying what appeared to be a simple handheld device. She was a small woman with the kind of intense eyes that suggested she understood things that would make most beings lose sleep. "Ambassador," she said, "I understand you were impressed by our primitive combustion technology. Would you like to see how we actually power our vehicles?" She gestured toward one of the human tanks which had been idling quietly during the demonstration. "This particular model uses what we call a chemical combustion engine, though that's not entirely accurate. It's actually a contained fusion plasma hybrid system that we've disguised to look like a traditional internal combustion engine." Kethlorn felt his superior attitude beginning to develop structural cracks. "Fusion plasma hybrid?" "Oh yes, we've been using controlled fusion for propulsion for about 3 centuries now. The combustion engine appearance is purely aesthetic. We thought it gave our vehicles a charming retro appearance." General Wells picked up the explanation. "The projectiles we demonstrated earlier, those aren't actually depleted uranium rounds. They're quantum state manipulation devices designed to look like traditional kinetic projectiles. Much more effective than pure energy weapons, we've found." The ambassador's worldview was experiencing what engineers would call catastrophic structural failure. But your development level, your primitive technology." "Ah," Dr. Vasquez said with a smile that contained entirely too much understanding. "I think we should probably explain about the Great Concealment." She activated her handheld device, which projected a holographic display that made Kethlorn's advanced viewing apparatus look like a child's toy. The image showed Earth's actual technological development timeline, and the numbers were disturbing. "We achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 800 years ago," Vasquez explained. "Gravity manipulation came about 200 years after that. We've had workable quantum computers for roughly 600 years, and we solved the unified field theory problem around 450 years ago." The timeline continued, showing achievement after achievement that predated Zephyrian civilization by centuries or millennia. "But why," Kethlorn asked weakly, "would you conceal such advanced capabilities?" "Well," Chen said, "after we developed interstellar travel, we started monitoring galactic communications. We discovered that the usual pattern for most civilizations was to develop impressive technology, announce themselves to the galaxy, and then get conquered by someone with slightly more impressive technology. We decided," Wells added, "that it might be more prudent to let everyone else believe we were still figuring out agriculture while we quietly developed defensive capabilities." Vasquez brought up another display showing galactic civilization patterns. "We've been watching the Zephyrian Collective for approximately 300 years. Very impressive plasma technology, by the way. We incorporated some of your innovations into our own designs around 200 years ago." "You've been watching us?" Kethlorn's voice had now reached frequencies that only small mammals could hear. "Was constantly," Chen confirmed. "Your gravitational manipulation techniques were particularly elegant. We've made some improvements, but the basic principles were solid." As if summoned by his growing existential crisis, the communication system in Kethlorn's damaged ship began broadcasting frantic messages from the Zephyrian fleet. "Ambassador," Commander Vexthara's voice crackled through the damaged systems, "we're detecting massive gravitational anomalies around your position. Our sensors are showing impossible energy readings. Please report status immediately." Wells looked at the damaged communication array with professional interest. "Would you like us to repair that? Our technical teams are quite good with Zephyrian technology." "You can repair," Kethlorn began, then stopped. Of course they could repair it. They'd probably invented half the components. The human demonstration continued with increasingly impossible displays, aircraft that moved without any visible means of propulsion, weapons that fired projectiles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, defensive systems that bent space-time around protected targets. "The most challenging part," Vasquez explained, "was making everything look appropriately primitive. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to disguise a gravitational manipulation drive as a chemical rocket? The engineering challenges were extraordinary." "But your cities," Kethlorn protested desperately, "your infrastructure, everything looks so basic." "Surface appearances," Chen replied. "Most of our actual civilization exists in pocket dimensions, much more efficient use of space, and it helps maintain the illusion that we're still struggling with basic construction techniques." Commander Vexthara's voice continued, emanating from the damaged ship, growing increasingly frantic. "Ambassador, we have multiple contacts approaching your position. The energy signatures are... they're not possible. Some of these readings suggest technology that exceeds our theoretical maximums." General Wells activated her own communication device. "Commander Vexthara, this is General Wells of the Terran Defense Force. Your ambassador is perfectly safe. We're simply conducting a friendly technological exchange." "Terran Defense Force?" Vexthara's voice reached new heights of confusion. "But you're a primitive species. You don't have a space force." "Oh, we have quite an extensive space presence," Wells replied cheerfully. "We've been operating in this sector for approximately 400 years. Lovely nebula cluster, by the way. We've established several research stations in the region." Dr. Vasquez pulled up another display showing the actual extent of human space operations. The network of installations, ships, and monitoring stations stretched across several star systems. "We've been keeping an eye on Zephyrian expansion," she explained to Kethlorn, "mostly to ensure you didn't accidentally stumble into any of our more sensitive projects. We're quite fond of you, actually. Your plasma technology research has been genuinely innovative." "You've been monitoring our research?" Kethlorn asked. "Well, yes. We've been monitoring everyone's research. It's amazing what you can learn when everyone assumes you're too primitive to understand their communications." The ambassador's ship suddenly came alive with new activity as human technicians began swarming over the damaged hull. Within minutes they had not only repaired the damage but improved the shield generators and upgraded the communication systems. "There you go," Chen said proudly. We took the liberty of installing some of our defensive improvements. Your shields should now be approximately 300% more effective against kinetic weapons. Kethlorn watched in stunned silence as his ship's systems began reporting performance improvements across all categories. The humans had not only repaired his vessel, but had somehow made it significantly more advanced than when he'd arrived. We've also, Vasquez added, taken the liberty of installing some of our stealth technology. You should now be effectively invisible to most scanning systems below Class 7 sensitivity. Class 7? Kethlorn repeated weakly. On an isolation system, Wells explained. We've been categorizing galactic civilizations by their actual technological capabilities rather than their claims. The Zephyrian Collective rates as a solid Class 4 civilization. Very respectable. And humans? Ooh, we don't rate ourselves. Seems rather presumptuous. Commander Vexthara's voice emerged from the newly upgraded communication system with crystal clarity. Ambassador, your ship's energy signature just increased by several orders of magnitude. What exactly is happening down there? The humans, Kethlorn said slowly, are not what we believed them to be. What do you mean? I mean, the ambassador continued, staring at the bustling human facility around him, that we may have made a slight error in our assessment. General Wells approached with a tablet containing what appeared to be technical specifications. Ambassador, we've prepared a small gift for your people. These are the plans for some basic defensive improvements that should help protect your colonies from some of the more aggressive species in this region. Kethlorn looked at the tablet, which displayed technology that was simultaneously completely beyond his understanding and elegantly simple in its presentation. We've also, Shen added, prepared some cultural exchange materials. We'd be happy to share some of our entertainment media. Have you ever experienced something called jazz music? Jazz music? It's a human art form. We think the Zephyrian auditory system would find it quite pleasant. Dr. Vasquez activated another device, filling the air with complex harmonic patterns that seemed to resonate with frequencies Kethlorn hadn't known existed. The music was simultaneously chaotic and perfectly ordered, primitive and sophisticated. Fascinating, he murmured, finding himself genuinely moved by the strange sounds. We have approximately 400 years of musical development to share, Vasquez said, along with literature, visual arts, and what we call cuisine. We're particularly proud of our fusion cooking techniques. The irony was not lost on Kethlorn that humans had mastered fusion in their kitchens as well as their reactors. There is, Wells said, consulting her tablet, one small favor we'd like to ask in return. The ambassador braced himself for whatever impossible request was coming. We'd appreciate it if you could share your experiences with other civilizations you encounter. Not everyone is as diplomatically sophisticated as the Zephyrian Collective. Some species might react poorly to discovering that their assumptions about primitive civilizations were incorrect. You want us to warn other civilizations that you're more advanced than you appear? Not exactly, Chen said. We'd prefer if they simply approached first contact with a bit more humility, perhaps without quite so many assumptions about technological development. Kethlorn understood. The humans were gently suggesting that the galaxy's standard approach to new civilizations might benefit from some revision. Of course, he said, though I suspect some civilizations might have difficulty accepting that their superiority is not as absolute as they believed. Change is always challenging, Vasquez agreed. But we've found that most species adapt eventually. The alternative is discovering that your primitive neighbors have been politely tolerating your condescension for several centuries. Commander Vexthara's voice emerged from the communication system again. Ambassador, we're detecting additional ships approaching your position. The energy signatures are... they're unlike anything in our databases. Wells looked up from her tablet. Oh, those are probably our research vessels. We've been conducting some experiments in dimensional physics in this region. Nothing too dramatic, just some basic space-time manipulation studies. Space-time manipulation, Kethlorn repeated, the words sounding increasingly surreal. Elementary stuff, really. We've been working on improving interstellar travel efficiency, Current hyperdrive systems are terribly wasteful of energy. The ambassador's ship's sensors began detecting the approaching human vessels, and the readings were problematic. The ships appeared to be moving through space in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. How, he asked, are your ships moving like that? Like what? Chen asked, genuinely puzzled. They appear to be existing in multiple locations simultaneously, while moving at speeds that should be impossible even for advanced hyperdrive systems. Oh, that, Vasquez said dismissively. We've been experimenting with probability state navigation. Instead of moving through space, we simply adjust the probability that we're already at our destination. Much more efficient than traditional faster-than-light travel. Probability state navigation, Keth Lorne repeated, his voice now carrying the tone of someone whose reality had been thoroughly deconstructed and rebuilt with entirely different architectural principles. The human vassals materialized around the landing facility, their forms shifting and changing as they settled into what appeared to be their preferred dimensional configuration. They were beautiful in a way that made Zephyrian engineering look like child's finger paintings. "Welcome to Earth," Wells said, as human personnel began emerging from the ships. "We hope you've enjoyed your visit. Is there anything else we can help you with?" Ketlon looked around at the bustling facility, the impossible technology, the friendly humans who had just casually demonstrated that everything he'd believed about galactic civilization was fundamentally wrong. "Just one question," he said. "Are there other civilizations like you, species that have concealed their true capabilities?" The humans exchanged glances that suggested this was a question they'd been expecting. "Well," Chen said slowly, "there might be a few others. The Altarians, for instance, have been doing fascinating work with quantum archaeology, and the Centaurians have made some remarkable breakthroughs in consciousness transfer technology." "The species we classified as pre-industrial agricultural societies?" "Those would be the ones," Vasquez confirmed. "Lovely people. The Altarians make the most extraordinary poetry, and Centaurian cuisine is simply divine." Kethlorn felt his worldview complete its final, decisive collapse. "How many civilizations have we misclassified?" "Oh, probably most of them," Wells said cheerfully. "Turns out that broadcasting your technological capabilities to the galaxy is not actually a survival trait. Who knew?" The communication system crackled to life again, but this time the voice was different. Commander Vexthara's tone had changed from confusion to something approaching panic. "Ambassador, we've just received reports from across the sector. Multiple civilizations are reporting unusual readings from species we've classified as primitive. The Regalian hegemony is claiming that their Stone Age neighbors just offered to upgrade their Star Destroyer fleet. The Andromedan Empire says their pre-spaceflight contacts have been casually mentioning their interdimensional research projects." Kethlin looked at the humans, who were maintaining expressions of perfect innocence. "Did you coordinate this revelation with other civilizations?" he asked. "We may have sent out a few messages suggesting that now might be an appropriate time for some species to be more honest about their capabilities," Chen admitted. "The galaxy seemed ready for a more accurate understanding of technological development." "The Vegan Confederacy," Vexthara's voice continued, "is reporting that their feudal monarchy neighbors have been operating a pan-galactic transportation network for the past 6 centuries. Ambassador, what exactly is happening?" "Paradigm shift," Kethlorn said weakly. "We're experiencing a galaxy-wide paradigm shift." Dr. Vasquez patted his shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but felt more like someone consoling a child who just learned that the adults had been humoring them all along. "Don't feel bad," she said kindly. "Everyone makes assumptions. We certainly did. We assumed that advanced civilizations would be too busy conquering each other to notice if a few primitive species quietly developed technology that made conquest pointless." "And were you correct?" "Well, we're about to find out, aren't we?" The communication system erupted with reports from across the galaxy. Species after species was discovering that their galactic neighbors were not what they had seemed. The carefully maintained hierarchy of technological development was collapsing, as civilizations revealed capabilities that rendered previous assessments meaningless. "This is," Kethlin said, watching his species' understanding of the galaxy crumble. Going to require significant revisions to our diplomatic protocols. Change is opportunity, Wells replied philosophically. Perhaps the galaxy will be more interesting when everyone stops pretending to be less capable than they actually are. Commander Vexthara's voice cut through the chaos of reports. Ambassador, I need you to return immediately. The Galactic Council is calling an emergency session. Apparently we need to discuss the Primitive Species Revelation Crisis. Primitive Species Revelation Crisis? Kethlorn asked. That's what they're calling it, Vexthara confirmed. Though personally I think the day we realized we're not as smart as we thought might be more accurate. Kethlorn looked at his upgraded ship, then at the humans who had just casually revolutionized his understanding of galactic civilization. Before I go, he said, I have to ask, are there any actual primitive civilizations in the galaxy? The humans exchanged glances again. Well, Chern said, there are a few species that genuinely are at early stages of development. We've been keeping an eye on them, making sure they don't get conquered by anyone before they have a chance to develop their own defensive capabilities. You're protecting genuinely primitive species. Someone has to, Vasquez said. The galaxy can be a dangerous place for civilizations that haven't yet learned to hide their true capabilities. As Kethlorn prepared to return to his ship, General Wells handed him a small device. This is a communication beacon, she explained. If your people have any questions about the new galactic situation, or if you need assistance with the more aggressive civilizations, just activate it. We'll be happy to help. Help how, exactly? Oh, we have some experience with aggressive neighbors, Wells said with a smile that suggested the experience had not ended well for the aggressive neighbors. We're quite good at diplomatic problem solving. Kethlorn boarded his upgraded ship, which now responded to his commands with an efficiency that bordered on the telepathic. As he prepared to depart, he looked back at the human facility, which still maintained its appearance of charming primitiveness, despite having just demonstrated technology that exceeded his civilization's theoretical capabilities. Ambassador, Chen called out as the ship began to lift off. Thank you for visiting. We hope this has been educational. Educational. Kethlorn considered the word as his ship rose into the atmosphere, leaving behind a planet that had just redefined his understanding of technological development, diplomatic relations, and the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. His ship's sensors, now dramatically improved by human technology, began detecting the true scope of human space operations. Installations that had been invisible to Zephyrian sensors were suddenly apparent, revealing a network of facilities that stretched across multiple star systems. Commander, he said as he established communication with the Zephyrian fleet, we're going to need to revise our assessment of human technological capabilities. Revise how? Vexthara asked. Completely, from the beginning, possibly several times. As his ship entered hyperspace, Kethlorn reflected on the events of the day. The humans had managed to fundamentally alter galactic civilization without firing a shot, conquering a territory, or even raising their voices. They had simply revealed that everyone's assumptions about technological development were wrong. The galaxy, he realized, was about to become a much more interesting place. Behind him, on the small blue-green planet that had just redefined interstellar relations, the humans were probably already planning their next diplomatic initiative. Because apparently, when you possessed technology that made everyone else's achievements look quaint, the polite thing to do was to upgrade their weapon systems and offer to share your recipes. The Zephyrian Collective had spent centuries perfecting the art of looking down on lesser civilizations. Today, they had learned that the view from the top was not nearly as reliable as they'd believed. Somewhere in the upgraded systems of his ship, Kethlorn was certain he could hear the faint sound of jazz music, playing a tune that sounded suspiciously like cosmic irony set to an impossible rhythm. The galaxy would never be the same, and honestly that was probably for the best.